In the mid-19th century, humanity discovered a way to bend time across space. Wires, thin and silent, carried voices and symbols over distances that once required days, even weeks, to traverse. It began simply, almost quietly, a spark of electricity across a copper wire. Yet in that small, invisible pulse lay the seed of a global transformation. The telegraph was not merely a technological invention. It was a revolution in human thought, a bridge between minds separated by mountains, rivers, and oceans. For the first time in history, a person could send a message faster than the speed of a horse, faster than a ship, faster than a single human could run. Samuel Morse, a painter and inventor, sat in his study in New York, contemplating how to transmit letters across great distances. It was not the machinery alone that made his work remarkable, but the vision behind it. The idea that ideas themselves, messages, news, urgent information, could travel independently of human footsteps. Morse, alongside his assistant Alfred Vail, painstakingly devised a code, a series of dots and dashes representing letters, numbers, and punctuation. To an observer today, it might seem primitive, a simple binary system. But in the 1830s, it was revolutionary. Suddenly, information could leap across wires, reaching towns and cities far faster than any messenger could hope. The first public demonstration in 1844 is emblematic of the wonder of that era. From Washington, D.C. to Baltimore, a distance of 40 miles, the first telegraph message leapt along the wire. What hath God wrought? Morse had sent, a simple biblical quotation that captured the awe of a civilization on the brink of connectedness. Imagine the astonishment of those who heard. Ima- Imagine the astonishment of those who heard the message arrive instantaneously. Words carried not by horse, not by wind, but by electricity. They were hearing human thought travel faster than the speed of imagination. Telegraph lines soon spread across continents. Across Europe, Asia, and the Americas, wires stretched over cities, forests, and deserts. Each pole, each wire, represented human ambition and ingenuity. The telegraph allowed merchants to track shipments, governments to coordinate distant posts, and journalists to deliver news almost in real time. Families separated by vast distances could now exchange letters with a speed previously unimaginable. Every click of the telegraph key was more than a letter. It was a connection, a spark of human presence bridging space. Yet telegraphs alone were only the beginning. The voice itself, that most human of instruments, would soon follow. Alexander Graham Bell, a Scottish-born inventor, was fascinated not only by sound but by the mechanics of speech and hearing. In 1876, in Boston, Bell achieved what many thought impossible: the first intelligible telephone conversation. A human voice traveled through wires, transmitted as electrical signals, and emerged intact on the other end. "Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you," Bell called, and history shifted in an instant. For the first time, a voice could traverse a distance that once required hours of walking, riding, or rowing. The telephone was more than convenience. It changed the rhythm of human interaction. Families could converse across towns, businesses could negotiate deals in real time, and physicians could provide guidance to remote communities. Operators, often women working long hours in switchboards, became essential facilitators of this new world. Their hands, moving quickly across wires and plugs, controlled the flow of countless conversations. The labor of connection was visible here, human hands ensuring that the promises of technology were realized in daily life. Even as telegraphs and telephones spread, the human desire to connect outpaced technology. Engineers dreamed of networks that could span continents, oceans, and eventually, the globe. Scientists exchanged letters and papers, seeking ways to share discoveries with colleagues far away. Consider the small story of a 19th century astronomer in Europe sending calculations to a colleague in America. Before the telegraph, this exchange would have taken months by ship. With telegraph wires in place, it happened in hours. Ideas traveled faster than ever, reshaping the pace of scientific inquiry and planting the first seeds of the digital age. The turn of the 20th century saw these networks evolve further. Wires stretched under oceans, connecting continents and enabling telegraphic messages between Europe and North America, later between continents separated by thousands of miles. Radio waves, too, began to carry signals invisibly through the air, further extending the reach of human communication. In quiet labs, engineers experimented with sending messages via pulses of light through vacuum tubes and early electrical circuits. These were small steps, almost unnoticed at the time, yet each step built towards something unimaginable, a network connecting every human being with unprecedented speed. Through all of this, the story of connection remained profoundly human. Telegraphs and telephones were tools, but the desire they served was universal: to share, to inform, to understand one another across distance. A farmer sending news of a bountiful harvest, a scientist sharing a discovery of a rare celestial event, a mother speaking to a child in a distant city. All were expressions of the same impulse that centuries later would power the internet. Every wire laid, every signal transmitted, carried not just information, but a human story, a human intention. As these networks matured, the complexity increased. Switchboards became more sophisticated, long-distance operators developed routing techniques, and engineers devised ways to prevent interference. These systems required constant human ingenuity, problem-solving, and collaboration. Errors, misrouted messages, and technical failures were inevitable, but so too were moments of triumph. A successful transmission across a transatlantic cable was celebrated not merely as a technical achievement, but as a victory of human patience, curiosity, and determination. It was during these decades that the imagination of the future began to take hold. Scientists envisioned networks connecting laboratories, universities, and government institutions, where data could flow as freely as letters or telegraphic signals. Conceptual sketches of computers exchanging information, of machines talking to one another, emerged alongside experiments with electrical circuits. The telegraph and telephone networks had demonstrated the power of connectivity. The next challenge was to create networks that could carry not only voice or Morse code, but information in a form that could be manipulated by machines themselves. By the 1950s, ideas that seemed speculative became practical realities. Early experiments in computing, data storage, and electronic communication converged. Engineers began exploring how multiple computers might communicate reliably over long distances. Packet switching, a seemingly abstract concept, promised to break information into small, manageable pieces that could traverse networks independently and reassemble at the destination. These ideas built directly upon the human desire first demonstrated by the telegraph to send messages quickly, accurately, and across vast distances. Even as technical theorists worked, ordinary humans continued to push the boundaries of connection. Families wrote letters to distant cities, Businesses coordinated supply chains across states, and universities shared research. Every act of communication was a small rehearsal for the future. The lessons were clear: reliability, redundancy, and adaptability were essential. Systems must anticipate failure and find ways to continue functioning. These lessons, learned in the age of wires and signals, would become fundamental principles for the networks of the future. Pause for a moment. Reflect on this. If you could witness the first message sent along a transatlantic telegraph cable, or hear the first human voice transmitted over wires in a distant town, what would you feel? Excitement, disbelief, awe. These early connections were not merely technical achievements. They were proof that human ingenuity could make the world smaller, faster, and more interconnected. Every pulse, every vibration of electricity carried human intent, curiosity, and hope across the distances that once separated us. By the time the 1960s arrived, the groundwork for the internet was firmly in place. Decades of experimentation, invention, and human persistence had created not just wires and signals, but a mindset, a belief that information should flow freely, quickly, and reliably. The telegraph and telephone networks had demonstrated the possibilities and limitations of connectivity. The next chapter would be digital, transforming the abstract pulse of electricity into structured, machine-readable information, and eventually creating a network linking computers, and ultimately humans, across the globe. The whispering wires of the past were the first steps toward this reality. Each telegraph line, each telephone wire, each experiment in electrical communication was part of a chain, extending across time and human ingenuity. The world had learned to send messages faster than the speed of a horse, faster than the ocean could carry a ship. It had learned that information could travel independently of human feet, that voices could be carried invisibly, and that distance was no longer an insurmountable barrier. And so, as wires stretched across continents and oceans, connecting human thought in ways once impossible, the stage was set for the next transformation. The age of whispered wires had shown the potential, but the digital networks of tomorrow would realize it fully, a vision born from curiosity, patience, and the universal desire to connect. The mid-20th century was a world suspended between innovation and uncertainty. Nations flexed their technological muscles, and the threat of conflict spurred both fear and ingenuity. Amid this backdrop of geopolitical tension, a quiet revolution was taking shape, one that would transform communication forever. The Cold War was more than a battle of ideologies. It was a race to secure information, to ensure that messages could traverse continents even in the event of disaster. Governments, scientists, and engineers pondered a frightening question. If traditional communication lines were disrupted, how could critical information survive? This question, simple in words yet complex in implication, gave rise to a new way of thinking about connectivity. In laboratories and research centers across the United States, brilliant minds began to imagine networks that could withstand catastrophe. Unlike the telegraphs and telephones of earlier eras, which relied on linear connections and single points of failure, this new vision proposed a system in which information could move through multiple paths, reassembling at its destination even if some connections were severed. It was a radical idea: decentralization as security, collaboration as resilience. Engineers began to draft theoretical models, laying the groundwork for what would eventually become the ARPANET, the first operational packet switching network. Among the visionaries were Paul Barron and Leonard Kleinrock, names that may seem obscure today, but whose ideas shaped the very essence of modern networking. Paul Barron, a researcher at the RAND Corporation, imagined a distributed network capable of surviving atomic attack, a network in which messages could be broken into smaller units, sent along different routes, and reassembled at the receiving end. Each packet of information would be independent, carrying with it the instructions necessary to find its way, ensuring continuity even in the face of destruction. Baron's concept was initially met with skepticism. The world was accustomed to point-to-point communication, not this modular, resilient approach. Yet the elegance and foresight of his vision would soon become undeniable. Meanwhile, at the University of California, Los Angeles, Leonard Kleinrock was conducting mathematical studies on information flow and network efficiency. His work explored the behavior of data packets as they traveled through nodes, how congestion could be managed, and how reliability could be maintained even under high loads. Kleinrock's calculations were precise, theoretical, and abstract, yet they hinted at something profoundly practical: a digital network that could link computers across distances, share data instantaneously, and adapt dynamically to failures. The collaboration between theory and vision, between Kleinrock's mathematics and Baron's resilient network concept, would prove pivotal. In the early 1960s, as these ideas coalesced, the concept of a real, working network emerged. The ARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency of the U.S. Department of Defense, recognized the strategic value of resilient communication. Funding was allocated, engineers were recruited, and research laboratories became incubators of experimentation. It was an era of trial and error, where late nights were spent wiring computers together, debugging early software, and testing transmission protocols. Imagine a small team huddled in a laboratory, cables sprawled across tables, punch cards scattered like autumn leaves, and engineers peering over oscilloscopes, waiting for a single flicker of signal to confirm a successful transmission. Each success was small, tentative, yet exhilarating, the birth pangs of a network that would redefine global communication. The first 4 nodes of the ARPANET were humbled by today's standards: UCLA, Stanford Research Institute, UC Santa Barbara, and the University of Utah. Yet these nodes represented a monumental leap forward. Connecting them required not just hardware, but protocols, a shared language for machines to understand each other. Engineers had to design systems that could route messages dynamically, handle errors gracefully, and allow multiple computers to communicate over the same lines without collision. It was a task of both imagination and meticulous technical skill. The first message sent over this fledgling network was, in its own way, prophetic. On October 29, 1969, a computer at UCLA attempted to log into a machine at Stanford. The team typed "login," but the system crashed after the first 2 letters. And so the first message ever sent over the ARPANET was simply, "Hello." The laughter, relief, and awe of the engineers in that moment captured the human element of innovation. They were not witnessing a finished product, but the spark of something far greater. This imperfect beginning foreshadowed the immense potential of a system that could grow, adapt, and eventually link billions of devices across the globe. Human stories abound in this early era. Engineers often worked late into the night, fueled by coffee, curiosity, and the thrill of pioneering something unprecedented. They debugged programs by hand, soldered connections, and wrote protocols from scratch, knowing that their efforts might fail spectacularly before succeeding. One anecdote recalls a graduate student spending hours tracing a garbled message, only to realize that a single flipped bit had altered the meaning. In those moments of frustration and triumph, the essence of early internet culture was born: collaboration, patience, and a relentless pursuit of connection. The early ARPANET also demonstrated the profound power of shared knowledge. Universities, research centers, and military labs could now exchange information at speeds never imagined. Scientists studying weather patterns could send data instantly to colleagues across the country. Mathematicians could test algorithms remotely. Social scientists could share survey results without waiting weeks for postal delivery. Each successful transmission was a testament not only to technology, but to the human desire for understanding and collaboration. As the network grew, so did its complexity. Engineers had to contend with issues that seem almost quaint today: how to route packets through multiple nodes, how to avoid congestion, how to recover from errors without losing critical information. Yet these challenges underscored a profound truth. Communication is not merely about machines, but about relationships between people, between ideas, and between systems. Each solved problem strengthened the network. Each failure taught valuable lessons. The ARPANET was more than an experiment. It was a living laboratory in human ingenuity and perseverance. Consider the first experimental data packets themselves. Kleinrock's team describes the process in vivid detail: packets of information, small bundles of digital data, racing across wires from one node to another, reassembling at their destination like scattered puzzle pieces. Each successful delivery was a triumph of both mathematics and engineering, a proof that abstract theory could manifest as tangible communication. The thrill of these early experiments is palpable. The exhilaration of seeing a packet arrive intact, of realizing that computers, machines often considered cold and unfeeling, could now communicate with each other in a way that mimicked human conversation. Yet the human element remained central. Engineers shared late-night dinners, debated endlessly about protocols, and celebrated every incremental victory. The culture of innovation was not competitive but collaborative, defined by a collective desire to connect, to experiment, and to push the boundaries of what was possible. This ethos, curiosity, collaboration, and a willingness to experiment, would become a hallmark of internet culture, echoed decades later in open-source communities and online knowledge-sharing platforms. Mid-story reflection invites us to pause and imagine the environment. A lab humming with machines, cables snaking across the floor, students and researchers watching oscilloscopes flicker, and the first hesitant messages transmitting across the network. It is a moment of awe and suspense, where human ambition meets technological possibility. Consider how each small decision, each debugged program, each packet sent, contributed to a vision that would eventually envelop the world. By the early 1970s, ARPANET had begun to demonstrate the practical potential of packet switch networks. More nodes were added, and protocols evolved. Email emerged as a revolutionary form of communication, allowing instant messages across vast distances. For the first time, people could send digital thoughts to each other as easily as paper letters, and the implications for collaboration, creativity, and society were staggering. The engineers and visionaries of this era had laid the foundation not just for a technological system, but for a new way of thinking about information, connectivity, and shared human experience. The story of ARPANET is a story of resilience, creativity, and foresight. It reminds us that the technologies we often take for granted began as fragile experiments, nurtured by a small number of determined individuals working under pressure and uncertainty. Each packet of data, each experiment, each collaborative breakthrough carried within it the potential to reshape the world. And reshape it did, from a handful of connected computers to the global digital web that billions now rely upon every day. As we reflect on the birth of ARPANET, it is clear that this network was more than wires and protocols. It was a testament to human curiosity, ambition, and collaboration. It demonstrated that even in an era of fear and uncertainty, when the shadow of conflict loomed large, people could create systems that connected, inspired, and endured. The legacy of ARPANET is not simply technical, it is human. It is the story of visionaries daring to imagine a connected world and working tirelessly, often against the odds, to make it real. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, the ARPANET had demonstrated a remarkable truth. Computers could communicate, share data, and collaborate across vast distances. Yet the vision of a truly global network remained nascent, limited to a handful of research institutions and military laboratories. The next stage in this journey was ambitious, connecting not just a few nodes, but entire networks across the world, linking researchers, academics, and eventually the general public in ways never before imagined. Universities became the crucibles of this expansion. Engineers and computer scientists discovered that collaboration between institutions could accelerate progress. Data from one lab could inform experiments in another, and results could traverse countries in minutes rather than months. Imagine a meteorologist in Colorado transmitting climate data to a team in England, who then integrated it with local observations to predict weather patterns more accurately than ever before. Or consider astrophysicists sharing telescope readings in real time across continents, piecing together cosmic phenomena that no single observatory could fully capture. These early collaborations were more than technical exercises. They were glimpses of a future in which human knowledge was no longer confined by geography. In parallel, the technical underpinnings of networking matured. Packet switching, protocols, and error handling mechanisms became increasingly sophisticated, allowing more nodes to join the network reliably. Universities and research centers experimented with connecting their mainframes, mini computers, and eventually personal computers. This growing web of connections created not only a technical network, but a cultural one. Scientists, engineers, and students began to think of themselves as part of a global intellectual community. The ARPANET, once an experimental tool for transmitting data, had evolved into a platform that fostered real-time collaboration, sparking creativity and accelerating discovery in every connected field. It was during this era that a visionary named Tim Berners-Lee stepped onto the stage. Working at CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research, Berners-Lee confronted a fundamental problem. Scientists were generating enormous amounts of data, but sharing it efficiently across computers and across national boundaries was cumbersome. Files were stored in incompatible formats on different machines. Emails and phone calls were inefficient for large-scale collaboration. Berners-Lee's insight was deceptively simple. Create a universal system of interlinked documents accessible from any computer, anywhere in the world. In 1989, Berners-Lee drafted the proposal that would become the World Wide Web. He imagined a network not just of machines, but of human knowledge, documents connected by hyperlinks, easily accessed and shared, forming a digital tapestry of ideas. To make this vision a reality, he developed URLs, a way to locate documents on the network, HTTP, the protocol enabling retrieval and transfer of those documents, and HTML, a format allowing text, images, and links to coexist in readable, structured pages. These technical details could seem dry, but in practice, they transformed how humans interact with information. Imagine sending a letter across the planet in milliseconds, readable by anyone, anywhere, instantly interconnected with other letters and ideas. This was the promise of the web. The first web page, hosted at CERN in 1990, was simple by today's standards: text explaining the World Wide Web project and instructions for creating web pages. Yet for those who witnessed it, it was breathtaking. Berners-Lee and his colleagues realized that information could now flow freely, without intermediaries, and without the delays inherent in older networks. The excitement was palpable. Here was a system where anyone with a computer could share knowledge, learn from others, and contribute to a collective pool of human understanding. Browsers soon emerged to make this new universe navigable. Mosaic, released in 1993, provided a user-friendly interface for accessing web pages, turning the web from a tool for experts into something approachable for the curious. Netscape followed, offering more sophisticated navigation, graphical content, and faster performance. Email and FTP remained essential tools for collaboration, enabling not only the exchange of documents, but also conversations that transcended borders. Early users explored this new digital landscape with the wonder of explorers discovering a continent for the first time. Anecdotes abound, students discovering educational resources from halfway across the globe, artists sharing creations with a global audience, researchers collaborating on problems that once seemed insurmountable due to geographic separation. The human experience of these early days cannot be overstated. Every click, every loaded page, was a small marvel. Imagine a teenager in a small town seeing a photograph of the Eiffel Tower or reading a scientific article from MIT, all from a single personal computer. These experiences shaped perceptions of possibility and fostered a culture of curiosity, creativity, and collaboration. The web was no longer simply a technical achievement. It was a social and cultural phenomenon, redefining how humans interacted with knowledge, with each other, and with the world itself. This period also demonstrated the challenges inherent in rapid expansion. The early web faced issues of standardization, compatibility, and accessibility. Different institutions stored information differently, and without consistent formats, much of the potential for seamless access was lost. Yet these challenges were met with creativity and collaboration. Engineers, programmers, and users developed conventions, protocols, and software that allowed the web to grow organically. The process was iterative, experimental, and human at every turn, a reflection of the very culture that had driven the ARPANET decades earlier. One illustrative story comes from a group of early web developers experimenting with hyperlinks. They discovered that connecting documents logically, rather than simply alphabetically or chronologically, allowed users to navigate ideas intuitively. In effect, they were creating a digital library whose architecture mirrored the associative nature of human thought. This insight transformed the web from a repository of static pages into a dynamic space where ideas could interconnect, inspire, and evolve. It was a revelation not only in technology, but in pedagogy and cognition. By the mid-1990s, the World Wide Web began to transcend academia and research, entering homes, libraries, and workplaces. Web browsers became gateways to education, commerce, and entertainment. The first search engines emerged, allowing users to find information in ways previously unimaginable. Microstories from this era are striking, a scientist in Japan consulting a European colleague's database in real time. A child discovering digital encyclopedias for the first time. A musician uploading songs to a global audience without the need for a record label. Each story underscores the web's transformative power and human impact. The web's growth was not only about technology, but about human ambition and creativity. Developers, users, and visionaries collaborated across continents, often without formal coordination, united by a shared excitement about possibility. The collaborative culture of the early internet was both technical and social, reflecting the belief that information should be shared, accessible, and interconnected. It was a culture that valued experimentation, tolerated failure, and celebrated discovery, the same ethos that had driven the creation of ARPANET, now amplified on a global scale. Consider the magnitude of this achievement. a decentralized, interoperable network connecting millions of computers, allowing instantaneous access to information and communication across time zones, languages, and cultures. Every node, every link, every server contributed to a vast, living tapestry of knowledge. The web transformed human experience, reshaping commerce, education, social interaction, and cultural exchange. And yet, it remained grounded in human ingenuity, the tireless work of programmers, the vision of pioneers like Berners-Lee, and the curiosity and engagement of early adopters. By connecting computers globally, the web also highlighted new challenges and responsibilities. Issues of accessibility, equity, privacy, and digital literacy began to surface. Who would control this new space? How would information be preserved and protected? These questions, emerging in the 1990s, were precursors to the complex debates that continue today. They remind us that the web is not just a technical network, but a human ecosystem, shaped by the choices, values, and ambitions of its participants. Pause for reflection. Imagine logging onto the first web page or sending your first email across continents. The thrill, curiosity, and wonder were not only about accessing information, but about participating in a new kind of society, one where boundaries were less relevant, collaboration was instantaneous, and human knowledge could circulate freely. Every early user, whether scientist, student, or hobbyist, was part of a collective experiment that continues to evolve today. It becomes clear that the web was both a technological marvel and a profoundly human achievement. It built upon decades of experimentation, insight, and perseverance, transforming small experimental networks into a global platform that connects billions. The transition from ARPANET to the World Wide Web was not merely about linking computers. It was about linking minds, ideas, and cultures, creating a new canvas for human creativity and collaboration. The foundation laid in this period would set the stage for the digital renaissance that followed, the era when the internet would enter homes, businesses, and daily life, changing how humans live, work, and imagine the world around them. By the mid-1990s, the internet was no longer a confined space of universities and research labs. It had begun to seep into everyday life, quietly transforming homes, workplaces, and communities. The wires and protocols that once connected a handful of researchers now formed the backbone of a burgeoning digital society. Internet service providers emerged, offering access to anyone willing to subscribe. And for the first time, ordinary people could surf the web, exploring information, connecting with distant friends, and participating in a world that had previously been the domain of scientists and engineers. The arrival of the first ISPs was met with both excitement and trepidation. Families across the globe experienced a new kind of connectivity. Consider the story of a suburban household in the United States receiving its first dial-up connection. The initial screech and whir of the modem became a symbol of possibility. Parents peered curiously at their screens while children discovered chat rooms, early online games, and forums where ideas were exchanged with strangers in faraway cities. The email inbox replaced traditional letters, enabling near-instant communication with friends, family, and colleagues. The world suddenly felt smaller, more accessible, and teeming with opportunity. For many, the internet was not merely a tool, it was an invitation to participate in a cultural experiment. Early forums and bulletin boards became gathering places where people shared hobbies, expertise, and passions. A gardener in Australia could trade tips with a botanist in Germany. A history enthusiast in Brazil could debate theories with a professor in Canada. This digital democratization of knowledge reflected a profound human impulse, the desire to connect, learn, and create. It was an era when knowledge was no longer restricted by geography, and the thrill of discovery was accessible to anyone with a computer and curiosity. Creativity flourished in this new environment. Independent musicians uploaded songs to early websites, reaching audiences they would have never found through traditional channels. Researchers published studies online, bypassing traditional gatekeepers and allowing their findings to circulate freely. Artists, writers, and programmers explored new forms of expression, experimenting with digital media that could be shared instantly across continents. Each click, each upload, each message contributed to a collective cultural awakening, demonstrating the power of the internet to amplify human ingenuity. Yet with expansion came challenges. The internet's rapid growth revealed vulnerabilities in security, privacy, and ethics. Early users discovered that the openness that made the web thrilling also exposed them to risks. Viruses, malware, and hacking began to appear, reminding users that technology, like all tools, could be wielded for harm as well as good. Ethical dilemmas surfaced as well: how to manage personal information, intellectual property, and access to content. The tension between boundless access and responsible use became a defining theme of the digital age, highlighting that the web was not only a technological system, but a social ecosystem shaped by human choices. Consider a researcher in the early 2000s uploading critical climate data to an online repository. For the first time, colleagues worldwide could access, analyze, and build upon the work in real time. Yet with this openness came responsibility, ensuring the data's integrity, protecting sensitive information, and navigating the ethical implications of sharing findings that could influence policy or public perception. The internet, in this sense, was not merely a network of machines. It was a network of trust, collaboration, and shared responsibility. The internet's expansion also catalyzed profound shifts in commerce. Small businesses, previously limited by geography, found new markets online. Entrepreneurs could reach customers halfway around the world, test products, and receive feedback instantly. E-commerce platforms emerged, and with them, entirely new business models. Consider a family-run bookstore in a small town discovering that their rare books could attract buyers globally simply by listing them online. The democratization of commerce mirrored the democratization of information, emphasizing that the web's influence extended far beyond science and academia into the very fabric of daily life. Education, too, transformed. Students accessed resources once confined to libraries and universities, from digitized encyclopedias to interactive tutorials. Teachers incorporated online materials into lessons, enabling individualized learning and encouraging exploration beyond the classroom walls. Micro-stories abound. A high school student in rural India participating in a collaborative astronomy project with peers in the United States. A language learner practicing conversation with native speakers via early chat platforms. A budding programmer sharing code with a global community and receiving instant feedback. The web became a living classroom, a place where human curiosity and ingenuity intersected in real time. At the same time, the cultural impact of early digital communities reshaped human interaction. Chat rooms, forums, and mailing lists created spaces for dialogue that transcended borders. People discovered communities of shared interests, often forming connections that would have been impossible offline. These early networks fostered empathy, collaboration, and understanding. Digital microcosms of society that allowed participants to engage with perspectives beyond their immediate environment. Human stories, such as a musician collaborating with a producer on another continent or a researcher coordinating experiments with distant colleagues, illustrate the internet's profound ability to unify diverse talents around common goals. Despite these successes, the internet was not without its growing pains. Security breaches, data loss, and the misuse of digital tools became increasingly apparent. society grappled with questions that remain relevant today. How do we protect privacy while encouraging transparency? How can open knowledge coexist with intellectual property rights? What responsibilities do individuals, corporations, and governments have in safeguarding the digital commons? These challenges underscored a critical lesson. The internet, though revolutionary, is neither inherently good nor bad. Its value depends on the ethical choices of its users and the structures that support it. The rapid evolution of online tools also reshaped creativity. Graphic design, music production, writing, and even early animation found new avenues of expression. Artists could distribute their work globally without intermediaries. Musicians could bypass record labels. Writers could reach readers without traditional publishing. Early platforms for collaboration allowed for crowdsourced problem solving, and open source projects became incubators of innovation. Each new digital creation contributed to a growing culture of shared creativity, demonstrating that the internet was as much a human phenomenon as a technological one. Pause for reflection. Imagine receiving your first dial-up connection, watching the screen flicker as the modem established contact, and exploring a world of information and human connection previously impossible. The thrill of discovery, the uncertainty, the excitement of connecting with someone on the other side of the planet. These experiences defined the early digital renaissance. Every user, from a student to a musician to a scientist, became part of a shared experiment in connection, creativity, and culture. By the late 1990s, the internet had truly entered the mainstream. Educational institutions, libraries, and workplaces incorporated it into their daily routines. Businesses conducted transactions online. Social connections flourished in chat rooms and early social platforms. Knowledge once trapped in textbooks or journals became accessible with a few keystrokes. Micro-stories of innovation and adaptation highlight the human side of this transformation. A grandmother sending her first email to grandchildren abroad, a small-town entrepreneur building a business that reaches global customers, a student collaborating with researchers thousands of miles away. These narratives reveal that the internet's power lay not just in technology, but in its capacity to amplify human ambition, creativity, and connection. The digital renaissance also highlighted the importance of stewardship. As more people joined the network, the responsibility to maintain its integrity became apparent. Ethical guidelines, security protocols, and user education emerged as essential components of a healthy digital ecosystem. These efforts reflected a growing awareness that the web was a shared space, a digital commons shaped by collective action, trust, and vigilance. It was a recognition that the internet's potential would be realized only through careful balance. The freedom to explore and create tempered by responsibility to protect, preserve, and respect the rights of others. In reflecting on this era, it is clear that the commercialization and mainstream adoption of the internet were not merely technological achievements. They were human achievements, stories of curiosity, collaboration, creativity, and resilience. From the first ISPs to early email systems, from home connections to burgeoning online communities, each step was defined by people discovering new ways to connect, share, and participate. The Digital Renaissance was both a continuation of the collaborative spirit that gave birth to ARPANET and an amplification of human ambition, bringing connectivity and knowledge to millions of homes worldwide. The story of the internet in this period demonstrates a timeless truth. Technology is meaningful not because it exists, but because humans use it to create, collaborate, and connect. The digital renaissance reminds us that behind every signal, every packet, every email, and every web page, there is human ingenuity, curiosity, and imagination. The internet was no longer just a tool for scientists. It was a platform for society itself, reshaping how humans interact, create, and envision the future. As we step back from the frenetic growth of the internet, it becomes clear that the most remarkable aspect of this vast, interconnected system is not its technology, but the humans who made it possible. From the earliest experiments in packet switching networks to the first web pages and the digital renaissance of the 1990s, collaboration has always been at the heart of the internet story. It is the vision of individuals daring to imagine a connected world, coupled with the painstaking labor of engineers, researchers, and early adopters, that transformed a handful of experimental networks into a global phenomenon. Collaboration, in this sense, is more than a technical necessity. It is a human value embedded into the very fabric of the web. Consider the thousands of scientists sharing research across ARPANET nodes, troubleshooting network issues in real time, and exchanging ideas across continents. Each successful experiment was not just a technical triumph, but a testament to human ingenuity and collective effort. Later, when Tim Berners-Lee introduced the World Wide Web, the emphasis remained on universal access and shared knowledge. His vision was not to create a system of isolated machines, but a platform where ideas could flow freely, empowering anyone, anywhere, to participate. The early web was built on trust, cooperation, and a shared sense of purpose, principles that remain vital today. Yet alongside this collaborative triumph lies a sobering lesson. Digital knowledge, while seemingly permanent, is inherently fragile. The same tools that allow instantaneous communication, global collaboration, and vast information storage are vulnerable to loss, corruption, and misuse. Servers fail, archives are corrupted, and cyberattacks threaten to erase data with a few keystrokes. Even as we marvel at the durability of the internet, the human cost of neglect or inattention becomes clear. A single mismanaged database, a failed backup, or a poorly secured server can erase years of work and knowledge. One illustrative microstory involves a university team racing to recover a corrupted digital archive. Months of digitized manuscripts, painstakingly scanned and annotated by scholars worldwide, suddenly became inaccessible due to a storage failure. Researchers scrambled, coordinating across time zones, rewriting scripts, and restoring backups. Each moment was tense, each decision crucial, and yet through persistence and ingenuity, much of the collection was salvaged. This episode highlights a fundamental truth. While the internet appears vast and infinite, its survival relies on human diligence, foresight, and care. The fragility of digital knowledge underscores a broader responsibility for all who inhabit the digital ecosystem. As users, creators, and contributors, we are active participants in a system that links generations and cultures. Every email sent, every article uploaded, every contribution to an open-source project, and every lesson shared online becomes part of a collective tapestry. Digital citizenship, in this sense, is both a privilege and a responsibility. Protecting information, respecting intellectual property, and ensuring accessibility are not abstract ideals, but practical actions that sustain the web's vitality. Consider the simple yet profound ways individuals can uphold this responsibility. Backing up files is a small act with enormous impact, a safeguard against loss that preserves personal and collective knowledge. Contributing to open-source software strengthens tools relied upon by millions, fostering collaboration and resilience. Supporting online educational platforms allows knowledge to reach learners who might otherwise remain disconnected. Each of these actions, while modest in isolation, compounds across the digital ecosystem, reinforcing a network that is not only technical but deeply human. The internet also teaches lessons about resilience. Despite outages, hacks, and data breaches, the web persists, adapts, and grows. Redundancy, decentralization, and community-driven maintenance mirror the same principles envisioned by early network pioneers. Packet switching, peer-to-peer protocols, and mirrored servers are not merely technical constructs. They are reflections of a philosophy that prizes continuity, adaptability, and shared responsibility. The digital world, like any human endeavor, thrives when communities take ownership, innovate collaboratively, and anticipate challenges. Reflecting on the internet's trajectory, one sees the intergenerational nature of this digital web. Early pioneers laid foundations that enable today's innovations, just as contemporary users build upon their work. Students learning coding today, creators producing videos, and researchers publishing open access papers are all part of a lineage that traces back to the labs of ARPANET and the first web pages at CERN. Each action contributes to an enduring legacy, linking past, present, and future in a continuous chain of human knowledge and creativity. The human element remains central to the story. Behind every platform, protocol, and packet of data is a person or group of people striving to connect, communicate, and create. In digital communities, we see the same impulses that drove the earliest network engineers: curiosity, collaboration, perseverance, and a desire to understand and share. Whether it's a team restoring a corrupted archive, a musician sharing a song online, or a student collaborating across continents, the internet thrives on the collective engagement and responsibility of its participants. Security and privacy, while technical in nature, also carry human implications. Protecting personal information, safeguarding sensitive data, and maintaining ethical standards are not abstract concerns. They are essential to sustaining trust within the network. Users are stakeholders in a digital society,
The day had
and
begun
each
like
thoughtful
any other.
action
What
reinforces a
if
culture of
everything you
accountability.
own
with their
vanished?
usual rhythm.
Just as early
Merchants
network
calling out their
pioneers
wares,
carefully managed
children
protocols
darting
and transmissions, today's digital citizens must navigate the ethical and technical challenges of an increasingly interconnected world. The lessons of resilience and fragility extend beyond technology. They offer a metaphor for human knowledge itself. Just as the Library of Alexandria once stored centuries of accumulated wisdom, now digitized and dispersed across servers worldwide, our current digital repositories are subject to both preservation and loss. Without diligence, the knowledge we produce today, our writings, research, creative works, could vanish, leaving gaps in the historical and cultural record. The contrast between the internet's apparent permanence and its underlying vulnerability serves as a reminder that continuity depends on care, attention, and foresight. Mid-story reflection invites us to consider our personal role in this ecosystem. Each click, each share, each contribution becomes part of a vast, living network that links not only computers, but people, ideas, and cultures. By engaging thoughtfully, by backing up data, participating in open-source communities, or supporting educational platforms, we are sustaining a digital commons that future generations will inherit. The internet is, ultimately, a reflection of our collective values, the curiosity we foster, the knowledge we preserve, and the connections we nurture. This reflection naturally extends to creative and educational endeavors. Digital tools allow us to document experiences, collaborate across borders, and innovate at unprecedented scales. A teacher uploading interactive lessons, a researcher sharing experimental results, or a musician distributing songs online contributes to a digital ecosystem that amplifies human potential. These microactions, repeated millions of times, build the web not just as a technical network, but as a repository of shared experience, culture, and intellect. In contemplating the broader legacy of the Internet, it becomes evident that its true significance lies in human agency. The technology is remarkable, but the ingenuity, collaboration, and stewardship of people define its impact. The lessons of this era remind us that connectivity carries responsibility, that knowledge is both resilient and vulnerable, and that our actions reverberate across networks, generations, and cultures. As we conclude this journey, a final reflection emerges. The Internet is more than a collection of servers and protocols. It is a human artifact. Every innovation, every contribution, every interaction shapes its trajectory. Consider your role in this network, the choices you make, the knowledge you share, and the creativity you contribute. Each act, however small, strengthens the web, safeguards information, and honors the vision of those who first dared to imagine a connected world.